Christmas, Bloody Christmas is a 2022 festive slasher movie about a robotic Santa Claus celebrating the season with a brutal killing spree on Christmas Eve. Written and directed by Joe Begos, the film was brought to life as Begos was pitching a remake of the 1984 Christmas slasher classic, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. The festive season is upon us, and for the entire month of December, we'll be looking at horror movies that make you want to cozy up under a blanket with some eggnog and a warm fire flickering a lovely glow around the room. Christmas horror. It's one of my favorite subgenres, and there are a few movies that I have in rotation that I watch every year that help me get in the spirit of things. Christmas, Bloody Christmas is one that I actually missed out on last year, so I figured I'd remedy that by kicking off this year's festivities with a spiritual remake of one of the most iconic Christmas horror movies. Silent Night, Deadly Night is also on the docket this year, but for now, the rejected Robo-Santa remake is the one that we're looking at. The script was written during the lockdown in 2020, and the movie had a limited theatrical release on December 9th of last year with a simultaneous streaming release on Shudder. It did alright for an indie slasher movie about a killer robot Santa, but I didn't get around to seeing it. There's a local brewery near me that occasionally puts on movie showings where they serve lots of beer and good food and they give away prizes, and I always have a great time there. They'd announced that they'd be showing Christmas, Bloody Christmas, but hadn't announced a date right away, and by the time they did and I realized I couldn't make it that night, the movie was mostly out of my mind and I forgot to watch it. I've been looking forward to checking it out since then, so without further ado, let's kick off the festive season at Rocklin Graves with Christmas, Bloody Christmas.
You don't want to fuck in a toy store?
No. Well, maybe. I mean...
Sounds like you don't want to fuck in a toy store.
Alrighty, let's talk about the premise of this killer robot Santa movie. With something like that, there are endless possibilities, like maybe a crazed toy maker who snapped or had a malfunction in one of their designs. That could be wacky. Maybe it was hacked by a disgruntled employee working at a manufacturer, or maybe it was even possessed by some vengeful spirit. Well, it's none of those, so what are we actually working with here?
Wow, Slim Junko! This is just what I wanted! I want some!
We can all have some.
It's explained during a series of genuinely funny mock commercials and TV spots that a series of robots developed by the military as killing machines have been retooled for the holiday season as an animatronic Santa Claus. You know, that is absolutely the most insane and stupid premise for this movie, and it's also better than anything I could have asked for. If you're gonna make a killer Robo-Santa movie, you've gotta lean into how ridiculous that concept is, so honestly, all things considered, this is pretty much the perfect explanation for why the friendly animatronic Santa Claus goes full Silent Night, Deadly Night. Something that I found really surprising right off the bat was how natural the dialogue feels. There is a little caveat to that I'll get to in a second.
What are you gonna do with your big bonus? You got any plans?
Well, town shuts at 8 p.m., so no, not really.
We get introduced to Tori, our main character, who owns a record shop, and one of her employees, Robbie, who's trying to dissuade Tori from hooking up with a Tinder dude because he very unsubtly wants to fuck his boss.
I've blown him off twice already, so...
Third time's a charm.
Yeah.
Come on, get a drink with your old pal, Robbie.
The thing that caught my attention here is that you don't go into a low-budget killer Robo-Santa slasher movie expecting the characters to actually talk like people, but the way conversation flows between these two feels so much more natural than you'd likely expect. What it seems like to me is that Joe Begos wrote these characters in the way that he and his friends interact. In fact, you can feel a lot of Begos transposing himself onto them, and because this is a personality that he clearly understands and is comfortable with, it winds up feeling a lot more genuine. There isn't a whole lot of variety in the characters. Pretty much all talk the same and seem to have the same interests, but hey, for a movie like this that isn't character-centric, I'm absolutely fine with zeroing in on one type of character that you're good at writing. The first 35 minutes of the movie are almost entirely dialogue scenes, mostly between Tori and Robbie, and I'm eternally grateful that I didn't have to sit through 35 straight minutes of piss-poor robotic writing that would make the actual robot feel like a complex character with an ocean's worth of depth. I was seriously surprised by how natural these scenes felt, but I do have one gripe with them. The two are getting drunker and drunker as the night goes on, and if they start out talking like this when completely sober...
How about you give me back my fucking whiskey and stop talking about me flicking my fucking bean?
Okay. Then you can only imagine the depths that these conversations will reach once they've knocked a few back.
If you want to go home and fucking jerk off to fucking Blumhouse movies,
fucking ass over here.
okay.
It's very crude, and that's kind of the only side of them that we see. The movie isn't interested in fleshing out backstories or anything like that, which is fine given the kind of movie this is, but it does mean that since our only time spent with them is while they're crossfaded and horny, things are pretty crude pretty consistently. After a while, it did start to gnaw at my brain just a little bit since there isn't much downtime from this sort of thing, but I mean, it's also not entirely unrealistic. I personally know people who are like this, so hey, well done, I suppose. What's also refreshing about the characters is that they seem to conduct themselves fairly intelligently once Robo-Santa shows up. There's really only 2 sequences where more than one character needs to navigate an encounter with the jolly fella, and at least in the first one, the way they react to what's going on seemed mostly smart. I swear I'm not intentionally choosing movies where kids get brutally killed just to spite that one random Twitter person, but a kid does get mega killed in this movie, and when Tori sees it happen through a window, she doesn't brush it off, she doesn't go investigate. She immediately gets up, wakes up the others, and gets them to call the police. I really wasn't expecting there to be a moment in this movie with the amount of tension that this sequence had, but the way everyone reacts to this really dark situation they're in hit hard and felt genuine. Aside from this one dumbass who, for whatever reason, just ignores everyone and acts exactly the way I'd have expected everyone to act in a killer robot Santa slasher movie. It's just refreshing to see a slasher movie with such a ridiculous concept handle the characters as well as this movie does without trying to turn itself into a character drama. It just feels like real people who get caught up in an insanely over-the-top situation and try their hardest to escape, mostly. There is a cop at one point that shoots Robo-Santa, promises that he's dead, gets proven wrong very quickly, shoots him again, and then promises that he's dead again. That lesson went in one ear and out the other. Speaking of Robo-Santa, there's a lot of potential for some really fun stuff with a military weapon turned department store display, but it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of execution. The commercial we see at the start says that the thing has a vocabulary of over 90,000 words, which led me to get excited about the little Christmas-related quips that could follow some brutal kills, but nope, doesn't happen. Which I think is a huge missed opportunity, especially since the thing doesn't really do much robot stuff at all until the very end. And even there, it's mostly a cosmetic thing. Generally speaking, the robot angle felt like a way to explain why Robo-Santa is able to take the amount of damage it does, but I would have liked them to lean more into it. The kills mostly aren't anything that couldn't be accomplished by a strong human, and it could be pretty easy to forget that that's not what we're dealing with here. It gets pretty beat up during the climax, and there's a ton of really cool robotic degradation that takes place as Tori slowly dismantles the thing, but it's very clearly just a dude for most of the movie. It makes sense that it would be a humanoid face at the start since it's meant to be a display piece, but I think I would have liked to have some damage done to it earlier on to make it feel less like it's just an excuse for it to take a lot of damage until the climax. It's not a massive issue by any means, because Robo-Santa is still cool as hell and pretty intimidating, but I guess I was just expecting more in the way of the robo part. They also don't ever explain why it is that some of these altered military killing machines are reverting to their murderous ways, but honestly, in a movie like this, I don't really care all that much. They're better off focusing their runtime on the killer Robo-Santa instead of trying to justify everything. All of that being said, the brutality and gore is something that certainly did not disappoint. Robo-Santa is no joke, and the way these unfortunate victims are dispatched can be pretty damn gnarly. There are some fantastic practical effects on display that bring to life some truly vicious murders shown in gory detail. Santa's axe gets put to work, and what really works is how Christmas Bloody Christmas continually ramps up the violence and intensity without ever letting up. You start out just watching characters walk around on Christmas Eve and shooting shit while slowly getting hornier, drunker, and higher, and save for the 2 deaths of Tori's sister and her boyfriend, there's almost 40 minutes of buildup before the bodies really start falling. And once they do, things just get progressively crazier. You start out with these light chats on a street side and end with explosions and a battle with the Festive Terminator, so there's this great sense of growing insanity that pays off in a fucking awesome climax of fire and robotic destruction. It's like a roller coaster that takes its time to ramp up to the peak and then shoots down the summit at an insane speed full of split bodies and blown off heads, all realized with great effects that don't leave much to the imagination. If you're looking for carnage candy, this movie's got plenty to offer. Visually, it's no slouch either, setting the stage off the bat with these heavily saturated Christmas lights that give a great neon-lit backdrop for Robo-Santa's rampage and simultaneously make you feel all warm and cozy for the Christmas season. The sets are all wonderfully decorated with a lot of care, and similar to the way the characters interact, it feels like Begos is transposing a lot of his personality into the sets, giving them a really genuine touch. The scenes with Tori and Robbie walking out on the quiet street with all the Christmas lights up in the shops and the center off in the distance decorated for the season really adds to the feel of the movie. And when you see things like the decorations on this house, you can really tell how much care was put into making this feel like a proper Christmas movie instead of just adding snow and a few Merry Christmases to a story that could have taken place anytime. The score was also really good. It gave the movie a really nice synthy feel that complements the deep, oversaturated neon palette of the movie beautifully. It's just a really aesthetically pleasing movie overall, from visuals to music to sets. So far, so good, eh? Characters are pretty resourceful and talk like actual human beings, kills are fantastic and super gory with great practical effects. It's a great looking and sounding movie. There's gotta be something wrong with it, right? Well, yeah, obviously. The movie's not perfect by any means. The dialogue is believable and delivered naturally by actors giving really solid performances, but the nature of their conversations can start to gnaw at the brain after a while, and considering it goes on for nearly 40 minutes, you got plenty of time to get a little tired of hearing this kind of thing.
Speaking of, have you seen it?
Yeah, oh, it's fucking fat as fuck.
It's fat.
Oh, he be gaping that shit for sure.
It can feel like there's a fair amount of stretching the runtime to hit the point where it can actually be considered a feature film, like a lot of unnecessary slow motion at times, or super extended games of hide and seek that I didn't feel added much, and even with all that, the movie's not even 90 minutes long. The pacing can be pretty mixed because while the insanity does just keep ramping up, I felt like certain scenes overstayed their welcome a bit. By the time the credits rolled, it felt like I watched 3 alternate endings back to back, albeit each being cooler than the last. The climax really is a lot of fun, and it's presented in stages that are visually represented by how much damage Robo-Santa takes, and it winds up feeling like a multi-phase boss fight where a new moveset and arsenal is thrown at Tori each time she drains 1 health bar. It's a blast, and by the end, Robo-Santa is so busted that it's pretty much unrecognizable as the lovely fella it once was. The thing takes a ton of abuse from Tori, who just keeps on fighting like a badass no matter how many times she gets faked out, and her victory feels well earned. She's the only one who survives, so kudos to her for taking on a military killing machine and only walking away with a couple fingers missing. You've earned my respect. Despite a couple gripes with pacing, I was very pleasantly surprised by just how much I enjoyed Christmas Bloody Christmas. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but it's a damn solid slasher movie with brutal and in-your-face deaths, a good cast of characters that felt like a step up from what you'd usually expect, a really fun and consistent aesthetic, and a constantly growing intensity that culminates in a badass fight with explosions and fire and swords and laser eyes. It's a really fun time. I did feel like some of it overstayed its welcome, but if you're looking for a fun and brutal slasher movie to watch over the holiday season, I have absolutely no qualms recommending Christmas Bloody Christmas. And with that, we've kicked off the month of December, where I've got a few more festive horror movies to look at over the coming weeks. Next up, I'll be covering Silent Night Deadly Night, which should be a really fun time, but until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.